Bryan Stevenson is writing in his book, Just Mercy. He said, I changed planes in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where I met Steve Bright, the director of the Southern Prisoners Defense Committee. Steve was in his mid-30s and had a passion and certainty that led him to become a brilliant trial lawyer who had just been recruited to assist condemned people on death row in Georgia. We started talking. We didn't stop till we reached Atlanta. Brian, he said at some point during our short flight, capital punishment means them without the capital get the punishment. We can't help people on death row without help from people like you. We consider justice, equity, and compassion in human relationship. Human relations. I always want to say relationships. The full text of the second principle in the Unitarian Universalist Association's Principles and Purposes reads, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. This second principle is a statement of fact. We have observed it and like it. It's also a direction to follow. It is an ethic we work toward in our lives. Justice, equity, and compassion are applied in this principle to the way humans relate to humans. We've discussed justice in this congregation. Talked about justice for immigrants, formerly incarcerated persons, racial justice, all of that here. I regularly attend meetings of justice and beyond. Justice has long been an important topic for us. In like fashion, we have lifted up compassion over the last few years. We examined Karen Armstrong's Charter for Compassion in worship and also in sessions of adult religious education. The Charter of Compassion asks people to be thinking of others in everything that happens to them. But we have not spent much time with equity here at Community Church Unitarian Universalist. So I invite you today to think of this second principle as if it were a sandwich. Not the post-Thanksgiving cold turkey sandwich many of us are enjoying. Anybody have some of those lately? But one where a slice of justice and another of compassion are merged together through the presence of equity. Equity, the important part, I think, of this sandwich. But we must look first at justice and compassion. Justice, we find, leads us to peace. True peace is not merely the absence of war, it is the presence of justice, said Jane Addams. The presence of justice helps us to preserve peace in our communities. The presence of justice helps us to feel safe in our homes. But justice can also be used to control those who might threaten civil society. An overly strict sense of justice emphasizes punishment for the violation of rules rather than fair treatment of each individual. I quote, dominator culture teaches us that the core of our identity is defined by the will to dominate and control others. In the dominator model, the pursuit of external power, the ability to manipulate and control others, is what matters most. When culture is based on a dominator model, not only will it be violent, but it will frame all relationships as power struggles. Bell Hooks wrote that. There is an alternative to seeing life as a power struggle. We can recognize that time passes quickly. Too soon we are gone. And while we are here, we and those around us will gain more by moderating our punishments than by viewing everybody as a potential rival. I turn to the 17th century Dutch jurist Johannes Voet, who wrote, "Anger should be especially kept down in punishing, because the person who comes to punishment and wrath will never hold that middle course which lies between the too much and the too little. It is also true that it would be desirable that they who hold the office of judges should be like the laws, which approach punishment not in a spirit of anger, but in one of equity." Justice is tied directly to equity in the opinion of Voet. This is as it should be. Any form of justice that does not consider equity fails to serve the people fairly, fails to serve them with a full regard of their equal value under the law. In an ideal world, justice would receive the full benefit of equity. We turn now to compassion. I have always found that mercy bears richer fruits than strict justice, said Abraham Lincoln. You have heard the expression about mercy and compassion, how closely they are linked in so much of our conversation. While they may not be exactly identical, each is closely connected to the other. In addition, love is closely tied to compassion. Never forget that justice is what love looks like in public, said Cornel West. Now, several have queried me about the use of the word love. I have heard it called a fuzzy word. Some have said love has many interpretations. Who knows what people think of when you say this word love? Another has said it's kind of like when a minister has nothing else to say, they just say, "Oh, the power of love," and that will take care of it all. So let me step aside here for a minute to explain my usage of this word love. It has to do with my study of other faiths, of many faiths of the world. When I studied so many religions, I realized that insights gained in one faith could be of value to others. There are ways of explicating things in various faiths that might be more informative and useful to us as we shape and mold our own ideas. Certain ideas or concepts could be developed in one quarter that amplify the meanings in other areas, other faiths, or other perspectives of life. As an example, I found these words from Mechtilde of Magdeburg, a 13th century mystic, a woman who was writing on love. She said, "Undisciplined love dwells in the senses, for it is still entangled with earthly things. Disciplined love lies in the soul. It rises above the human senses and forbids the body its own will." Mechtilde says religious communities address love as a disciplined path of life and of living. This disciplined path extends out of faith communities to people. It is that sort of thing that allows us to exercise the discretion we hope we grow into as we become adults. And many of us do. And many of us takes a little while longer than adulthood for that to come. But when I read this, I not only saw the two views of Mechtilde, I knew that a distinction in the meanings of love had appeared many years earlier, and they are not confined to the area that many Protestant ministers have talked about in the past in addressing love, where you come down to words like eros and agape and amore and etc. and those meanings. The Hindus had used two Sanskrit words for love 5,000 years ago. Their sense-oriented word was kama. Kama saw love as selfish desire or private gratification. Kama, if followed too carefully, led people to a place where more after more becomes nothing more than more after more, and you could never gain enough more to satisfy your senses. For this reason, kama led to spiritual starvation. The Hindus also referred to love using the word prema. Prema aims for the giving of love to others. Prema, the Hindus were told, nourishes and heals. Prema sustains the soul. But there is more to say about Prema. In their mythology, there was a Hindu goddess named Prema. She carried 5 arrows, all of which had flowers on the end of them. People were urged to develop the traits found on the flowers held by each of these areas. This myth, this approach, was used to encourage people to develop prana, a sacred love to carry with them. The first trait we encouraged to use is time. This arrow encourages us to use time wisely. Time. The second arrow is one-pointed mind. This encourages us to carefully direct our attention to our aims and goals. One-pointed, not too abstract, not too getting lost in all the fuzzy details. One-pointed. The third is energy. This arrow encourages us to develop a consistent, dependable vitality of life. Energy, energetic, build it, use it, sustain it. The fourth is discrimination. This encourages us to use our senses as our guide, factoring in what we know and have learned in our approach to life. The fifth trait is an awareness of the unity of life. This arrow encourages us to develop our sense of equity, unity of life, equity. The view of compassion, as it is explained in Prema, points us directly toward equity, as does the view of justice shared by the jurist Vogt. And that's why I say we have a sandwich today. And I think about the fact that when we're talking about a sandwich, we don't say, I'd like to give you 2 slices of bread and cheese and ham in between it. No, we say, how about a ham and cheese sandwich? How about a BLT? How about a peanut butter and banana? Equity. That's the important thing here. As for compassion, though, one note. The risk with compassion is that people who develop a sacred love are around those who don't have such a sacred love in their hearts. For those we know who do not hold to a higher love have been known to take advantage of those who do. And so this is why we look at all 5 of these points, why we need wise use of our time, one-pointed mind of energy, discrimination, and equity. Equity is the most difficult of these 3 concepts to explain. Equity is often confused with equality. That is easy done. Their levels are so similar. But the cover of your order of service has a little cartoon on the difference between equality and equity. Equity carries with it a capacity to see the unity of life. Equity attempts to allow all people to attain equal rights. It is an attempt at equality. Equity is an attempt at equality. This, of course, applies, we think, when we take a look at it, to our criminal justice system. In a fair and just society, you can't create laws based on how you feel at the worst moment of your life. Those words came from Norris Henderson, the director of Voice of the Ex-Offender. I found them online. Norris was recently here in one of our services. In a fair and just society, you can't create laws based on how you feel at the worst moment in your life. In his view, good lawmaking should be tied to an equitable outcome as the new laws are being drafted. Equity is also of great value at each stage of our jurisprudence system. Decision makers should strive to place themselves into the shoes of the person being tried. However, law and equity are two things which God has joined, but which man has put asunder, said an Episcopal cleric, Charles Caleb Colton. Many of us, and this all includes me, easily ignore the needs of others. Too often our focus is primarily on ourselves. The question we face is, how big a step can we build for ourselves? And in the capitalist paradigm with which we live, building ourselves a bigger step is the ultimate step to take. This is what makes equity so difficult. It is one of these things where it needs to be balanced. It needs to be balanced by the desire to do what we can to make things good for ourselves, but also to understand that others have needs at the same time. We can be universalists here. We can realize we all came from the same place. We can carry this to an understanding of the similarities between all of us. We can know in our hearts that nobody is more worthy than any other person, and that should include ourselves or to others as well. But when it comes to building our own step in life, we can also ask, well, it could be nice if our step was just a little higher than that of those around us. I came to Unitarian Universalism because we do not build our faith on rules and regulations. We look at life and our lives. We open ourselves up to consider the concepts that led us to be who we are. We explore ideas designed to lead to self-improvement. By saying no to the do's and don'ts, Unitarian Universalists have opened a path toward becoming better people, and I firmly and completely believe that. And today we point out that ethics, human ethics, are an important component in our lives. In politics, as in religion, we are not captured by what leaders suggest we should think. Our course, our direction, is drawn from an outlook toward life affirmed and promoted in this community that equity holds its place between justice and compassion. Equity leads us to concern for those who suffer from capital punishment. Equity leads to our feeling the hurt from the mistreatment of members of our society due to race, gender preference, or national origin. All of these are to be considered as we look at any of these issues of life. Equity also guards our dismay, I think, over the disregard of our earth by those who desire greater wealth and power. In the next few months, there will be several opportunities to look more closely at the importance of equity in our outlook on life. The economic inequality discussions will be held tomorrow night, begin tomorrow night. This is your chance to look at a current UUA study issue, and I have seen some of the statistics that may help us all learn more about economic inequality, and how it relates to human equity and the desire for human equity. And the very next night, the CCUU Women's Book Group will examine the righteous mind, why good people are divided by politics and religion. I've not yet read this book, but the highlights I saw when it was skimmed, I found it also addressed this topic of equity. The UUA common read for this year is Just Mercy, written by Brian Stevenson. I quoted from it before about capital punishment. I'm planning an adult RE series on this book later this year. And you might also reread the CCUU Covenant of Right Relationship, which is in the hallway. Just read it and look for the evidence of equity in this document we drafted and signed here in this church. Whatever you do, whether you can participate in further discussions or not, my request is simply that we continue to explore the ways that equity for all is or is not lifted up in our society, and examine what you can do about it. May the love in your hearts find love in the hearts of those around you. Namaste.